Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman Encounter horror stories. First story. I believe in GOATMAN. GOATMAN lives. I know it. I remember the first time I heard a story about him. I didn't believe it. Ghosts I believed in. Spirits, sure. But a half-man, half-goat creature that wandered the woods and terrorized people? This was too much, even for my fertile imagination. My grandfather grew up in northern Ontario, where his family worked in the mining industry. He was the first one who ever told me about GOATMAN. One bitterly cold winter, when he was just a boy, a huge snowstorm blew through the area. He remembered at dinner time his father talking about how, when he was making his way home after gathering some firewood in the woods, he saw in the distance the figure of a man walking through the forest, bent against the wind and snow. He had called to him, but received no answer. Everyone thought it was a wandering vagrant, or someone who had gotten lost as the storm blew up and was searching for shelter. That night, though, Grandpa said that his family had woken up and seen what looked like a man walking around the house, looking in the windows. Come morning, they went to check it out. Instead of fresh human boot or shoe prints in the snow, they saw cloven hoof prints. And that's where the story ended. His story, anyway. Mine had yet to begin. My grandparents had moved a couple of hours away from that area, and I grew up living next door to them in a gold mining town. I'm an only child, but my best friend was my cousin, Tanya. She lived in the same town. We'd spend every summer in the woods around my grandparents and my house. Those woods had a magical quality to them. They felt extremely safe and wholesome, like the 100-acre wood from Winnie the Pooh or something. We'd play for hours in those woods, pretending we were Celtic princesses or pioneer women. But one day, we wandered a little too far. This was northern Ontario, so our entire town was surrounded by bush and rock, being part of the Canadian Shield. Not far beyond the safe, happy-feeling woods behind my grandparents' house was the lake the town had taken its name from. When I was little, it was a beautiful spot, but the mine had drained it due to some exploration. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, and our parents had always warned us not to go near there. It could be really dangerous. Tanya was a show-off. At 16 years old, she was only 1 year ahead of me, but boy did she lord it over me. She was petite, with graceful curves, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a flawless complexion. Boys fawned over her. I, on the other hand, was an awkward 15-year-old with thick, long brown hair, glasses, braces, and an acne problem. She was sweet and always told me I was pretty and helped me to feel better about myself, but she made no secret that she thought she was drop-dead gorgeous. And she was right. Tanya was also a lot more worldly than me. I was bookish, naive, and didn't have experience with boys. She'd already had several boyfriends and had tried smoking and drinking, two things I refused to do. So, it didn't surprise me when she said we should travel down to the fence that bordered the drained-out lake and flash the few guys who would be sitting in their diggers. Sorry, I don't know the right word for the equipment they used. They were working there. EW10, no. I said, they're like 40 years old, probably. So what? I like older men, she said, and started off through the dense forest towards the lake. Yeah, I'm sure you do, I said, rolling my eyes. I sure as hell wasn't going to be flashing my barely developed breasts at some random older guys, but I wasn't going to let Tanya claim to be the daring and brave one and go on her own, either. I've always been sensitive, but I was shocked that Tanya couldn't feel the palpable change in atmosphere when we left the higher ground of the woods that were closer to my grandparents' house to scramble down some of the rocky forest that ran down closer to the lake. I thought maybe it was a change in altitude at the time, but the woods suddenly seemed quieter, stuffier, and danker. Tanya was rambling on about her latest conquest, Jordan, a boy from grade 12, when we finally came into view of the lake behind the fence. She stopped in her tracks and looked back at me with a disgusted look on her face. EW, what the hell is that smell? She asked me, her pert nose wrinkling. It smells like ass. Ugh, I don't know, I replied. My nostrils were being assaulted by a smell I had never experienced before, something pungent and animalistic and wrong. Maybe there's some kind of bear cave or wolf den nearby, I added. Maybe it's coming off of the lake, she said, and we moved closer to the fence to look through. My grandparents had this large, two-story brick house right at the edge of town. The house was on a hill, so that walking in the front door, the main floor was flush with the ground, but when you walked out French doors that led off of the breakfast room onto the deck outside, you were a good story up off the ground. And from that vantage point, you could see the drained-out lake surrounded by forest. Usually, there were 1 or 2 bulldozers working there at any given time of the day. But today there was nothing. No bulldozers, no workers. That's odd, I said. Where are the workers? Even the bulldozers are gone. What day is it? I asked Tanya, thinking maybe it was a holiday or something and the guys didn't have to work. It's Monday, she said, raising her eyebrows. Who knows, though? Maybe the bulldozers had to be serviced. Let's walk around some more now that we're here. The smell was still there, and we were by no means getting used to it, but our sense of adventure won out over our sense of disgust at the musky, foreign aroma. We walked in silence around the fence line, and every twig that snapped underneath our feet sounded super loud, echoing out across the empty expanse of what used to be a crystal-clear lake. We couldn't hear any birds or other animals scurrying around in the forest, but neither of us said anything because before we had a chance to, we were confronted by something deeply unsettling. What the hell is that? I asked as we turned a bend. It looked like a huge, wrenching hole had been torn into the fence, which was splayed open. Why is there a hole in the fence? Probably teenagers coming apart here, Tanya mumbled, but I could tell she felt scared. We walked to the hole in the fence, and were hit with the same scent that had been lingering around us like a ton of bricks. Tanya gagged and hunched over, trying not to vomit. I must have had a stronger stomach. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and went to look more closely at the fence. We've got to get out of here, I said, seeing dark, wiry fur stuck in some of the broken fence. I think a bear, or something, has been here. I didn't hear anything from Tanya, but I was too busy looking at the fence. My heart dropped as I saw a streak of blood in the mud just inside the empty lake. No, not a streak, a trail of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to follow that trail. I looked back, and Tanya was sitting, pale-faced with her arms wrapped around her, on a fallen log by the fence. There's blood on the ground, I said, my voice echoing nervously on the lake. Blood on the ground, she mumbled in a strange, monotone voice. What the hell? Yes, genius, and I'm going to figure out where it came from, see if anyone is hurt. I snapped back. Tanya was a notorious girly girl, and I figured she was in shock from seeing it, too. Stay there, and if I'm not back in a few minutes, go for help. Help, she said, tilting her head and looking at me with blank eyes. I shuddered, but turned to follow the trail. I had only walked a few paces into the drained-out lake when the going got pretty rough. It dipped down pretty steeply from where I had entered the fence through the hole that was torn into it, and about 20 yards off, I could see one of the bulldozers that was usually busy working flipped over onto its side. The trail of blood I was following got more saturated. Instead of streaks here and there were puddles. My stomach was churning. I had stopped in my tracks, about 10 meters from the bulldozer, when I saw a man's boot sitting in a puddle of blood. I suddenly realized that I was a 15-year-old girl who was all of 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds, completely unarmed and incapable of defending herself against whatever had left all that blood. Suddenly, I felt panicked. I decided it must have been a sick bear or wolf who had picked off one of the workers. I remember my parents telling me that wolves and bears will usually leave you alone, and that only the sick ones ever go after humans. I turned and ran up the embankment and to the opening in the fence. But Tanya was gone. Tanya, I called out, not too loudly, for fear that whatever crazed, rabid animal that was out there would hear me and find me. Where are you? Stop screwing around. I searched the area for her, but there was no sign of her. The sun was starting to set. I figured that she got tired of waiting for me and freaked herself out and headed home without me. I was almost as mad at the thought of that as I was scared. But then I noticed something. The smell was gone. The smell from before, that horrible, acrid smell, was completely gone. The wind hadn't changed, nothing had. But the woods now smelled like woods. And there was bird song. Weird. I walked as quickly as I could back to my grandparents' house, and when I went in, everyone was sitting down to dinner, including Tanya. I quickly washed up and joined them at the table. You'll never believe what Tanya and I found out in the woods, I said. Around the table sat my grandparents, my mom and dad, and Tanya's dad, and Tanya, who was looking at me wide eyes and her head tilted oddly to the side. You were in the woods? Grandma said, as she spooned some boiled potatoes onto my plate. I hope you didn't go too far. That's the thing, I said, looking at my parents and then hastily away. We want to look through the fence at the lake. What? My father demanded, his face like thunder. That's so dangerous. There are sinkholes all over that place. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to listen. I replied. No need to listen, Tanya mumbled. What? I said, turning to look at her. She smiled wanly at me, got up from the table, and left the room. Just what is going on? Tanya's dad demanded, glaring at me. The adults seated around the table were all looking at me with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I burst into tears. Something terrible happened down there, I said, and my mother came to put her arms around me. Hysterically, I told them about how we found a hole in the fence and how I had seen blood in the mud and a man's boot and a tipped-over bulldozer. And then my mother ushered me from the room as my grandfather picked up the phone to call the police. We didn't finish having dinner there. My parents and I drove home, and I went to bed early. I was shaken from the day and entirely exhausted. They told me the police may want to talk to me in the morning, but not to worry about it. I knew they were too scared about what had happened to lecture me. The next day, my grandparents came over and told me that the police had searched the grounds and had found the hole in the fence, but nothing else. There was no blood to be found, no boot, no bulldozer. They had asked me if my imagination had gotten away with me, and I swore that it didn't. But I saw the concern in their eyes as they looked at themselves and me and back to each other. I stopped talking about it, and they stopped asking. Later that day, Tanya came over. My parents had let her in, and she flounced into my room and flopped on my bed. She punched my arm and said, "Why the hell did you leave me on my own in the woods yesterday?" "What? You left me," I said, looking at her confusedly. "When I got back, you were gone. I wasn't even 5 minutes." "No, I sat there waiting for you," she said, her eyebrows raised. "I waited until after dark, and you didn't come out. Then I went back to Grandma and Grandpa's. They said that you'd left with your parents. You're shitting me, and I don't like it. I've already been through enough." I snapped at her, feeling sick to my stomach. "I'm not shitting you. I swear," she said, sounding scared. "Something weird is going on. Last night, when I got back, Grandma and Grandpa and Dad seemed upset. I figured they were mad at me for being gone so long, so I apologized. Dad said to relax, and that I'd only been away from the table for 10 minutes. Then he told me about how they'd called the police and how your parents had taken you home. What is going on? I felt like someone had thrown ice water over me. Tanya, you had dinner with us last night. You were at the house when I got back, and it wasn't dark yet. We sat there in silence. We couldn't figure it out. Tanya asked if she could sleep over, and our parents agreed. We watched Friends reruns on my TV until we fell asleep in my double bed. It was the smell that woke me up. That same horrible, metallic, musky smell, like sweat and wet dog and blood and smoke all in one. And then I heard it. A tap, tap, tap on my window. I sat slowly up in bed, reached for my glasses on the bedside table, and put them on. Outside my house, looking in my window, was Tanya. She had a wide smile on her face, her head was tilted to the side, and every couple of seconds she was vibrating. I looked down beside me in the bed, and there was Tanya, fast asleep. By the time I had shaken her awake, it was gone. We turned the TV back on and watched game shows until the morning light streamed through my window. I went to look outside my bedroom, which was at the front of the house, above my mother's rose garden. There in the damp soil, I saw hoof prints. Second story. A creature stalks the swamps in Louisiana. When I was growing up, my dad would take my older brother Johnny and I on trips up the Louisiana bayou to go hunting and fishing every summer. Our dad started the tradition when we were little kids, and it was always a highlight of each summer. As time went on, Johnny and I grew older. Schedules conflicted, and we missed a year. Then another. Then another. We each just started doing our own thing. That is until earlier this year, when our dad passed away. Johnny called me up and suggested we go on another weekend fishing trip in honor of our dad. I agreed immediately and began packing my things. My fishing gear, some trail cameras, and a bow for hunting game. We set off early Friday afternoon when the sun was still high in the sky. I don't know how much experience you have with Louisiana bayou, but it's basically just a slow-moving swamp. The bayou can get boggy and smelly, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a place with more fish. We loaded our stuff into a boat and headed deep into the muck. Soon we were far from civilization, but we pressed on ahead, traveling miles into the wilderness. That was the entire point of these trips, after all, to get away, get into nature, and clear our heads. I was glad to be leaving everything behind for a few days. I took a video of our ride out, just so you get some idea of the terrain. After a few hours of riding, we reached the spot we'd picked out. Every summer, our dad would pick a new branch of the Delta to explore, so this year we'd done the same. There was something exhilarating about the idea that you were the first to explore a place. We pulled our boat onto the shore and set up a few trail cameras to detect motion. We'd use them to see if the game trails around were still used by deer. Me and Johnny found a good fishing spot and managed to reel in a few fish. The day passed, and the sun started to get lower in the sky. I had just pulled in my third fish when Johnny called out to me. I looked up to see him pointing across the river. "Look at that," he said. "This is what we saw." "Oh, we have to go check that out," Johnny said. I was worried for a minute, but the house was clearly abandoned and empty. On top of that, we were dozens of miles from the nearest person who might care. We ran back to our boat and used it to cross the river, walking through the house. It looked like it had been abandoned for about a decade. Just long enough for all the wood to be warped and rotted, but not long enough to start falling over. The house was full of stuff. Even plates and food were left out on the counter. "Looks like whoever was living here didn't care about leaving anything behind," I said. Then I turned to look into the living room. Someone had scratched huge letters into the wall above the couch. "These are his woods. These are his woods." Johnny asked, "Who is he?" I told him I didn't know. Something about the letters unsettled me. The way they were written, as if in a rush, like someone was in a hurry to scrawl them out. I looked through the house windows out at the woods, looking for, I don't know what. "Let's get out of here, man," I said. We left the house and crossed back over the river to our camp. Camping in a tent in a marshy bayou is a bad idea, so our dad had always taught us to use hammocks when we're out there. I climbed up a tree and strung my hammock about 10 feet off the ground, and Johnny did the same to a pair of trees close by. After that, we found a solid piece of ground, started a fire, and cooked some of our fish. I still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I'd gotten from the house. It just didn't make sense, and it didn't seem like the kind of thing a person did as a prank. I felt a little better as I ate my food. It was probably all in my head anyway. Me and Johnny told stories about our dad and past trips, ate our fish, and caught up with each other. It had been a while since we'd done something like this. By the time it got dark, I was more than ready to crash. I climbed a tree and into my hammock. Soon, I had fallen fast asleep. It was some time later, I don't know exactly how long, that I was woken up by the sound of something rustling through our things down below me. At first, I thought it was Johnny grabbing something, but no. There was another sound. The best way I can describe it is like this. Start breathing in and slowly close your windpipe. When it's almost closed, it'll make a strange, croaking noise. That was what I heard from below us. I froze in my hammock, but turned my head to the side, looking toward where Johnny was hanging. He was staring at me, an expression of confusion and fear on his face. I put my fingers to my lips, and he nodded. The croaking sound continued, punctuated by crashing noises as this thing below us rooted through all our stuff. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard the sound of it stalking off into the woods. We both waited for a long, long time before finally calling out. "What was that?" I whispered. "A bear, maybe?" Johnny said. I shook my head and looked over my hammock down at the ground. Johnny did the same, but it was too dark to see any details. "Let's just get some sleep, and we'll deal with this tomorrow," I said. Johnny nodded reluctantly, then turned over in his hammock. I lay in my hammock, heart racing for the next half hour. I drifted in and out of sleep until I saw the sky start to light up from the rays of the sun. I climbed down from my hammock to see our campsite had been completely destroyed. Our cooler of fish was torn open, our gear thrown all over the place, and our boat had been torn from its mooring and flipped upside down. My jaw dropped at that. The boat, together with its engine, had to weigh several hundred pounds. Johnny climbed down from his tree and saw the boat and torn rope. "A bear did that?" I asked. "Well, what else could it be?" He said. "I don't know," I said, "but I've never heard a bear make the noise we heard last night." We did our best to clean up the area. We thought about calling off our trip, but we figured that as long as we were better about keeping our food sealed up, we'd probably be fine. We spent the rest of the day trying to relax. We fished, bow hunted some squirrels, and soon the night's events seemed like nothing more than a hazy memory. Still, when I saw the sun going down, I felt my stomach tighten. As we made our way back towards camp, I grabbed one of the trail cams we'd set up. "Why are you bringing that?" Johnny asked. "So that when we're eaten by bears, we'll have at least some footage to sell to the news," I said. I set up the trail cam towards the trees where our hammocks were strung up. We decided to store our food up in a place further inland, setting it a ways away from our hammocks, just in case that thing came back. We ate some jerky, talked a little bit, then crawled into our sleeping bags. I tried to fall asleep, but ended up spending a few hours staring at the stars through the leaves. I knew it was unlikely that the creature would come back, but something about that sound it was making, it gnawed at my mind. It didn't sound like anything I'd heard from an animal before. I must have nodded off at some point, because I was woken up by the sound of something rooting through our things at the place where we'd left them. Our stuff was probably 100 feet away, but in Louisiana, that meant it was still completely hidden by leaves. The same croaking sound from before echoed from the area. I got on all fours in my hammock to try and catch a view of the area. Then I felt my right hand slip on the fabric. I tried to catch myself, but ended up losing my balance and falling out of my hammock the 10 feet to the marshy ground. I hit the ground hard. The mud absorbed most of my fall, so I only had the wind knocked out of me. I lay in the muck, just trying to breath. Then I heard the sound of something crashing through the forest. It was coming towards me. Something huge stopped just above my head, and I heard it standing there making its croaking noise. Then a light flashed out as the trail camera was activated by the motion and took a picture. Whatever the thing was made a terrible groaning noise at the light and ran off into the woods. I stayed laying in the muck for a long, long time until the only thing I could hear was the normal sounds of the bayou at night. When I got a hold of myself, I crawled back into my hammock. I looked over at Johnny and saw him staring at me with a hand over his mouth. It looked like a goat," he said. I swear it looked like a huge goat person. I lay there in my muddy, wet clothes until the dawn broke. We threw our stuff into the boat without talking much and set off for home. My ribs were tender, but not broken. It was only when I got home and checked the trail camera that I saw the picture it took while I was laying in the mud. Third story. The man I saw while I was camping. Every year, I go on an annual camping trip. I always go alone. It is one of my favorite trips of the year. Smelling the fresh air, picking all the edible berries I can find, it always makes me feel like I am one with nature. Last weekend, I went on my annual camping trip, but something different happened. I did the usual berry picking, fly fishing, and just laying out in an open field, but at nighttime, my usual routine was interrupted. Now, when I say I go alone on these trips, I mean, I'm the only human, but I always bring my dog, Caesar, just to keep me company. Well, I went to bed business as usual, and it remained that way for about 4 hours. Then, around 2 a.m., I was awoken to Caesar growling. It wasn't a revealing growl, or one that was meant to scare any predators. It was a growl that was slowly digressing into a cry. When I woke up, I checked my phone to see the time, and figured Caesar just needed to go out or something. So I began to put my clothes on to take him out of the tent. But that is when I noticed he was staring at something. He was staring so intently, so focused, like he knew something was where it was not supposed to be. I peered out the small mesh window in my tent to see what all the fuss was about, when I saw that my fire from the evening was now active. I put that fire out, there was no doubt in my mind. What the hell? I thought, and began to reach for my tent's zipper when Caesar nudged my hand with his nose. I looked back at the fire and observed it closer. That's when I saw him. It was a man, maybe 5 feet 10 inches and probably about 45 years old. He was just sitting on a log right next to my fire. I don't know how I missed him. I must have been too focused on the fire to notice him, but I saw him now, and he didn't see me. I began to observe him, curious, but also cautious. I wanted to believe that he was just a guy, cooking a meal and camping like I was, and he just thought this camp was idle. After a couple of minutes of observing him, I decided it was okay to get up and go talk to him, just to let him know I was there too. That's when he began whispering. It wasn't to anyone in particular, and I couldn't make out a word of what he was saying, but he was whispering. No one was around him. He was talking to himself. After noticing this, I stopped myself from opening the tent and decided to observe him closer than I had before. I began to notice how he moved. It was different than a normal human's movements. His head twitched almost like he was a squirrel, always on guard, ready to pounce whenever. This fast twitching and solo whispering got me on edge. There was just something off about this man. As I was watching him, Caesar hit the side of the tent, and the tent began to make a rustling sound. The man looked over immediately, and once again, not like the normal human. When he noticed someone else was with him, he turned immediately towards our tent, way faster than any human head I've ever seen. And the weirdest part was, he went from not knowing I was near him to making direct eye contact with me. When the tent moved, he turned and looked at me. Not the tent, not Caesar, but me, straight in the eyes. I was immobilized with fear. I didn't know what to do, and that when he smiled. Similar to all of his other mannerisms, his smile was not like any other human's. He smiled from ear to ear, with out-of-place white teeth that didn't match his dirty exterior. The man turned the rest of his body, keeping his head that was at first twisted backwards completely still, so that his whole body was now facing me. He stood up and made this weird pose. I would compare it to someone trying to mock a chimpanzee in a zoo. He had both of his feet spread out far too wide, and his arms followed suit. And in this unnatural pose, he hobbled over to my tent. I was paralyzed with fear. I thought in my head, run and take Caesar with you. But I just couldn't bring myself to move. The man continued until he was about 5 feet away from my tent, staring directly into my soul, with the most unnatural posture I've ever seen a human take. I guess Caesar was paralyzed with fear too, because he didn't make a sound or move a muscle. We both stood there, staring at this man, hoping for God knows what, just that the situation would end somehow. Finally, after what felt like 10 minutes, the man began to laugh like a child full of glee, like a daughter on Christmas morning who got the American Girl doll she wanted, like a son who got to play ball with his dad that he hasn't seen in 2 months. It was one of the most gleeful laughs I've ever heard, and the worst part was it was out of key. This was a fully grown man with a laugh that resembled a 7-year-old. He then stood upright, maintained his grin, and walked away out of our sight. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and in the morning I walked down to my car much faster than I normally do. Caesar and I packed up and headed home. This man has been haunting me. I don't think he's actually at my house, but I can't tell anymore. I live alone. It's just Caesar and I see this man in my dreams, and when I wake up screaming, I look out my window, and there he is again, with that same posture and that same psychotic smile. Fourth story. I'm still mentally recovering from this encounter. A little background before I unravel this horror story that is unfortunately true. First, I'm a police officer for the city I live in. I am including this detail because it plays a small part later in the story. Second, this happened last month, July 2016. So I'm pretty sure I will remember the details pretty accurately, not to mention that I practice depicting details of incidents every day, multiple times on paper 5 days a week. Anyway, I like to go fishing, either for bluegill or catfish for the most part. I like these two particular types of fish because they will feed at almost any time in the day, whether it's late or early in a 24-hour period. I tend to go late at night only because my sleeping schedule is set that way due to the hours I'm on duty. And on my days off, I have to do all of my running around and errands in the daytime. The spot I usually fish is about 12 miles out of the city and is a pretty little drive past some fields and 1 or 2 houses. After that, it's just a road and trees all along the side, stretched over it, kind of like a tunnel. About 6 miles down the road, you have to take a sharp right. On the corner, there was a man walking along the road. 6 feet 0 inches, dark hair, black shirt, tan pants. Looked like a straight guy, no tears or dirty marks on his pants. I didn't stop because I figured he was a field irrigator or he had something to do with working out there. They do all kinds of irrigation for fields at night. 20 minutes pass, and I am already on the fishing dock in my chair, listening to the cutting silence. No wind, no anything. I prefer it that way anyway, mostly because I have become a little paranoid being out at night all the time. You see some crazy stuff in the city at night when you're a police officer. It's very silent, the kind where you can hear the humming sound of the silence, if you know what I mean. But then there was a crack, as if someone was walking up. I turned around and flicked on my headlamp. I was clam at this point. I figure it might be a rabbit or maybe a small owl. To my surprise, it was the guy I'd seen earlier. He seemed blank. He just looked at me, and I looked at him. Me? Hey there. Beautiful night, isn't it? Try not to sound like a complete moron, stranger, yes. He paused before he said that, almost like he couldn't speak. He had a droning to his voice like he had a speech impediment or something. His voice sounded like a nail on a chalkboard. Scratchy plus the stutter before his words. It gave me the nastiest feeling. Literal chills. One word, and I was afraid of him. I deal with sex offenders, domestic violence, and drug dealers daily. And this guy had me feeling this way after one word. Me, did you come out here to throw some line too? This time he did not answer me. He started to shake, almost like he was about to have a seizure, except he was still staring right at me. And now he was making a straining noise with his throat, like he was growling. A human, a grown man growling at me in a truly disturbing tone 6 miles from the nearest house. Alone. My first instinct is to identify myself. I grabbed my credentials off-duty badge from my back pocket as I started to grab my tackle and chair. I put everything where I could pretty much pick up and go. But as I look up, he is still doing it, still making that noise. Me. Takes off headlamp and points at credentials. City police officer. Please, sir, keep calm and keep your hands visible to me. He would not stop. He only got louder. The thought that should be going through your head right now is exactly what was going through mine. What do I do now? I moved my light from the hand it was in into the hand with the credentials in it and reached for my CCW, concealed carry weapon. Call me a hothead, but honestly, what would you do? I am cornered here. He is standing right by the only walkway off the dock. Not to mention the only way to my truck. Right as I pulled it from my holster, this guy lets out a screech. Not a scream, a screech. I could say that is very close to the loudest thing I have ever heard with complete certainty. I jumped. Honestly, it was not expected at all. I get my light and weapon back on target, or at least where he was. I could hear brush and rocks moving. It seemed as if the noise was everywhere. I'd hear it here or over there. I decided to run to the truck. I didn't pick up anything, I just ran. More noises. They're legitimately behind me at this point. I dove in the truck and got out of Dodge. That's all that happened. Maybe a little anticlimactic, but this is a true story, and I am typing it on the internet. That drive back home was quite a train of thoughts. I haven't been out fishing alone since. Fifth story. I met GOATMAN in the woods last night. I love hiking. I love walking into the trees, getting further and further from civilization. The sounds of industry grow dimmer and dimmer. The sounds of nature take over. But that was before last night. Before last night, I thought I knew what was in the forest. I was sure that the most dangerous thing was a hungry bear or a twisted ankle miles from help. I may have been a fragile female, as my father liked to claim, but I was tough. I had more than enough knowledge and experience of basic survival. But meeting monsters, meeting GOATMAN, I expected none of that when I waltzed into the woods for what I figured was a routine overnight trip. I'd done it many times before, rolled into the parking lot of the Appalachian Trail at 8 a.m., armed with a small tent and the backpack it was attached to. My backpack was packed with food, water, a flashlight, a change of clothes, a first aid kit, a lighter. I was prepared. I thought I was prepared. It's always after I've gotten out of my Subaru and moved to the hatchback of it that I take in any others in the lot. A couple and their dog were making their way into the forest. Another car was already locked and left, and a pair of men, big guys wearing camo. They were hanging out by the tailgate of a truck, beers in hand. I turned away as one of them seemed to notice me looking. I could feel their eyes on me, though I ignored it. I glanced at them only briefly. They had fishing poles. Why do you need camouflage for fishing? I had thought to myself. I was focused on getting my gear out, so I didn't notice at first when one of them walked closer. His foot finally landed on a branch, that telltale crunch alerting me to his presence. He reeked, a mixture of cheap beer, sweat, and grease. He was smiling a gap-toothed grin. His beard was ragged. When he spoke, the stench grew. Better be careful out there, darling. These woods get dark at night. His eyes trailed over me. I puked a little in my mouth. Thanks. I forced a grin, but I think I'll be fine. I finished putting my backpack on with a pointed clip of the chest strap. He grinned wider, though he took the hint and stepped back. I closed the hatch and moved past him, not bothering to fake politeness any longer, keeping my eyes ahead of me. I pressed lock on my key fob and dropped the keys into one of my cargo pants pockets. The man and his friend were chuckling as I made my way across the bridge toward where the trailhead split. The sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt watched long after I turned the corner out of sight, following the creek down into the valley between the mountains. I should have left, shouldn't have ignored the way my instincts were screaming. Fortunately, I was good at ignoring things by pushing them to the back of my mind. I knew it was all but forgotten. The silence was strong, only broken by the occasional cry of a bird or the gentle rustle of leaves as a squirrel hopped by. It was a deep sort of silence that only the white noise of the breeze blowing through the trees could achieve. That's why I hiked. I could let it all go, focus on nothing but my footsteps, my breathing, the quiet murmur of the river. I stopped for a granola bar at what was probably an hour past last time I looked. I wasn't concerned with time at the time, so I can't say for sure. I sat on a rock a little off the path. It overlooked a small pond, where the water pooled before spilling down along the river. It was then, amidst the bubbling of the brook and the crinkling of my wrapper, that I first heard it. It made me pause. I think I stopped mid-chew. It didn't fit in at all with the forest sounds I was accustomed to. It was wrong. It took a couple seconds before it registered as words, sounding as if they were being said through auto-tune or Google Translate, like there was a filter of hesitation or misunderstanding. Wrong. Way. This. Let's. That. Garbled. Inconsistent. Like catching every other word of the sentence without the proper pause or context needed for the missing words. Look. Trail. Way. I was frozen completely and utterly. I stopped breathing. The footsteps came next, with no pace or rhythm to them. I was reminded of my 11th birthday when we went horseback riding. It wasn't a clip-clop, but it was close enough that my mind conjured up images of the Jersey Devil stamping its way through the woods though the pine barrens are about 100 miles south. A breeze blew by, and with it came the stench. Rotting meat, like when I'd found that dead cat under our back porch. Maggots writhing as they gorged on the dead flesh. I gagged and had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stop from retching. My eyes watered, mostly from the smell, but maybe a tiny bit because fear had taken hold of me. My heart beat like a drum in my chest as those footsteps got closer and closer. I pressed myself to the tree blocking me from sight of the path. It felt like an eternity before it was passing behind me. I could hear its wheezing breath, deep and labored, as it lumbered down the trail. And then it was gone around a bend, crooning something about look, leaves, trail. I sat on that rock, not daring to move for minutes after. I was at war inside my mind, trying desperately to convince myself that I'd imagined it or that it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was a confused old man lost in the woods. Maybe a dying deer was downstream somewhere. That explained the smell. But I pushed it to the back of my mind, shaking my head. If I don't think about it, then it doesn't worry me. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying slightly. I looked at the half-eaten bar in my hands, my stomach rolling at the thought of food. I threw the bar in the river and shoved the wrapper in my backpack. I drank half a water bottle, suddenly desperate for that cleansing cold on my palate. I contemplated leaving, but I didn't. I certainly didn't want to continue after it, but to go back now would mean walking during dusk. I wouldn't be back to my car before dark. If there's one thing I was always told, it's that there is never a good enough reason to be walking through the woods at night. The predators came out at night. I cautiously got back on track, keeping my pace slow so as not to catch up to nothing. Because there was nothing there, right? I walked for another hour or two, hyper-aware now of every sound and movement. At one point I thought I heard more words behind me. There was also a faint smell, not one of decay, but still like something I'd smelled before. I kept on moving. The spot I was looking for was only a little further, and I found myself hurrying despite my fear, ready to set up camp and hide myself away for the night. It seemed like the sun was setting before I knew it. By then, I had made it into the clearing I generally used as camp, which I'd finished setting up in no time. Where I was off the trail quite a bit. It required a fair amount of effort getting to being as it was through the thicket of non-trail, but I felt oddly safer, tucked into an innocuous part of the forest I was sure only I knew about. I'd stumbled upon it by accident a couple years ago, after getting briefly lost. I contemplated setting a fire like I usually would, which is probably frowned upon, I know, but I felt like it would draw too much attention. That feeling of being watching like tiny pin pricks along my skin had started up again. I forced myself to breathe as I sat in front of my tent and choked down a peanut butter sandwich for dinner. The full darkness of night soon prevailed. The stars shone brightly through the trees, and I laid down on a blanket to watch them for a while. It was then, as I managed to find a small semblance of peace, that a twig cracked in the distance. I frowned and sat up, peering into the darkness around me, though I couldn't see past where the clearing ended. I was just reaching for my flashlight when the wind blew again, my hair lifting with it. And there was that sickly, sweet smell of decay. Panic started to set it. I hurriedly moved into my tent, zipping it up securely. I hugged my knees to my chest and listened, squeezing my eyes shut as the noises grew more frequent. Another broken branch, shuffling of leaves, ragged breathing. I found myself shaking my head, thinking that this couldn't be happening. Not now, not to me. Look, trail. The voice was just as grating as before. Wait, dark. It grew closer. I could hear the moment it stepped into the clearing, the sound of brush giving way to the whispering of grass. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, trying to piece things together. The smell, the limited words, the clop-clop of cloven feet. It hit me suddenly what it was. What it had to be. GOATMAN. I'd read about him plenty of times on No Sleep. I'd laughed those stories off. I certainly wasn't laughing now, as GOATMAN shuffled closer to my tent. He began circling it. There. Dark. Wait. He repeated, pausing his steps every now and then. I was praying he'd go away. Maybe he didn't know I was in here. Maybe he'd get bored. Dark. Ambush. Tent. What? Where had he heard that? Because that's what this was, right? He only had words he'd heard before. Who on this trail had said that? My panic continued to rise, though I didn't dare make a move. Twigs snapped suddenly, somewhere in the direction of the trail. My head snapped to it involuntarily, and I had a sickening image of Goatman doing the same thing, listening for more words. The footsteps that grew closer sounded like they were being made by something. Someone desperately trying to keep quiet but failing. Why do you need camo for fishing? I thought again, this time just a bit hysterically. Goatman happened to have stopped on the opposite side of the tent, which favored him by allowing him to remain unseen. Not that it wasn't almost pitch dark out there, save for the moon and stars. Goatman lingered for a second, my attention snapping between him and the bumbling from the other direction, before he ambled away into the night. There was a second where I stayed perfectly frozen before that survival instinct I mentioned finally kicked in. I scrambled to grab my wallet from my backpack, then shoved it in a pant pocket. Keys, check. Phone, check. Flashlight, it'll give me away if I use it, but it's heavy duty, good for swinging, check. Shoes tied, check. Deep breath. I paused to inhale deeply, check. I put my hand on the zipper and stopped to listen. They were probably just about at the edge of the trees. The opening of the tent wasn't facing towards them, but it wasn't facing away either. But Goatman had gone that way, so that was a no-go anyway. The steps stopped, and I knew they must be looking right at me. I took a second to decide how to approach my escape. I'd already decided that my tent belonged to the woods now, and my backpack would only slow me down. Do I hurtle out and book it, or do I casually get out and then run? I placed my hand on the zipper. It was now or never. The sound of the zip seemed as loud as a gunshot. I slowly climbed out, making sure not to appear aware of the eyes on me. I gave a slow stretch, eyes steady ahead. I took a breath and pushed down all my fear and panic. Then I broke into a dead sprint. I heard one of the men shout, but I didn't hesitate as I ran towards the forest. The plan was to run straight and then cut right to get back onto the trail. I knew if I got on the trail that I could outrun them. I could hide if I needed once I was far enough away. They thundered after me, cursing loudly. I hit the layers of trees with a stumble, but my momentum kept me going. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, the trees' black lines cutting through the gray. My arms got scratched as branches whipped past. I wanted to turn my head to see if they were close. I could make out the sound of their steps over mine. I wanted to see if I could make out any sign of the trail I was running parallel to, but I didn't dare do so for fear of tripping horror movie style. I fell anyway. 1 second I was upright, and the next I was falling, landing hard on my shoulder. My flashlight was lost to the dark forest floor. Dirt covered my hands as I scrambled to get to my feet again. I was too late. A hand closed around the back of my shirt, yanking me harshly back. A scream almost tore itself from my throat, but then a hand was over my mouth, another one winding around my waist. I thrashed and tried to kick out, digging my hands into his arm around me. He held steady, laughing between pants. Should have known you were a runner. His hand slid lower over my hip despite my efforts. Tears filled my eyes and spilled down my cheeks like traitors. His buddy showed up behind us, slowing his gait to a light jog. He was breathing far heavier than the one holding me. Bitch is fast, ain't she? You know I love when they fight, though. The hand over my mouth loosened for a second as his other one moved to the button of my pants. Blind panic shot through me, and I bit down as hard as I could, warm copper filling my mouth. He yowled, grip going slack. I threw my entire weight forward, once again sent sprawling. The next seconds were a blur of hands grabbing at me, rocks digging into my hands as I struggled to get traction. I was sure for a moment that this was it. I was done for. I had thought Goatman would be my end, not like this. My hands touched metal just as my ankle was grabbed. I didn't hesitate, used the grip on me as leverage to twist around and swing. There was a crack as the flashlight connected with bone. The hand released me, The man it was attached to was yelling. I swung blindly once more, striking something soft this time. The hands reaching for me were gone. I no longer tried to run forward. Instead, I focused on getting to the path, cutting into the woods at a 90-degree angle. I was on all fours for a couple feet before I was finally vertical. My heart was pounding harder than ever. Tears and snot were running down my face. The taste of blood stained my tongue. I was more or less staggering through the brush, breathing heavily. Hide! My brain was yelling, hide, hide. You're making too much noise. So I hid. I made out a patch of ferns in the dark, dropped to my knees, and crawled into it. I pressed my back to a tree. Facing the trail, they wouldn't see me. I tried to calm my breathing, but couldn't stop the way it hitched on sobs. I could hear them once again trudging toward me, slowly this time. They were whispering harshly back and forth. You think she made it back on Dash? SHHHH. You talkin' ain't gon' help us. SHHHH. Goatman gurgled from next to me. I had to clap a hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. I slammed my eyes shut, trying to stop from sobbing. Chill. He sounded pleased with this new word. He was crouched next to me. I could tell, could feel his rotten breath on my face, could only imagine what he looked like next to me. Cloven feet and sideways pupils focused on me, watching, listening. Rough fingers were run gently over my hair, trailing over the side of my face. There was a moment where I was nothing but the personification of frozen. Runner. Fast. SHHHH. Did you hear that? Close. The men were close. What was a worse way to die? By their hands or Goatman's? Sounded like talking. Talking. Goatman mused next to me. Ambush. And then he was gone once more, heading back towards my tent. His steps weren't light, branches crunching under his feet as he went. Listen that way. Going back toward her tent. Must be. Come on. She may have a phone. And after Goatman they went. I sat there, dumbfounded that I was still alive. I sat there, breathing, amazed that I still was. Then I got shakily to my feet, making my way to the trail as quietly as possible. The relief that washed over me when the sound of the stream reached me was bittersweet. I had miles to go before I was out of the woods, both figuratively and literally. I started running when my feet reached the beaten-down soil of the path. I didn't stop when the screaming started. I certainly didn't look back when it started to echo. I didn't stop till I hit the trailhead, dawn just beginning to bleed light through the canopy of trees. My feet ached, cramps had me clutching my sides, my muscles were screaming. I paused only to throw up, dry heaving long after my stomach was emptied. There was a brief, sinking moment of terror when I saw my car and their truck in the parking lot, the thought that they'd done something to it suddenly hitting me. They evidently didn't think I'd be making it out alive, as my car started fine. My hands were shaking as they gripped the wheel. They were shaking the whole drive home and long after I'd made it there. I locked all my doors, pulled all the blinds, closed all the curtains. I showered and sobbed and brushed my teeth till my gums were red. I chased a sleeping pill with a bottle of water, then took another just for good measure. I slept and thankfully didn't dream. I wrote this all just now, after waking up. This is just as much a warning as it's a way to get it off my mind, so I can hopefully push it all down. I finish with this. If you ever find yourself alone in the woods with monsters, pray that there's something worse out there. It may be the only way you survive. And if that something worse happens to be Goatman, don't you dare say a word. Because if you have, then I'm afraid it may be too late. Sixth story. The Witch of Goat Mountain. The forests of the Pacific Northwest abound with stories of ghosts, ghouls, and various other beasts. But in the small mountain town where I grew up, our local legend was the Witch of Goat Mountain. As children, my friends and I were always out exploring the woods and freaking each other out with the different games we used to play. I remember often finding weird things like bones stacked neatly in strange formations with the skull of a deer in the middle, antlers still attached. On other occasions, I would hear beautiful singing in the distance. The words sounded sweet to my young ears, and I felt oddly drawn to them. Like I felt like I desperately needed to find whoever was singing that lovely tune. I never did, though. I always had this strange gnawing in my gut that I needed to get away from there fast. My dad's friends who were avid hunters would often come over and share strange experiences they had had while hunting. One of them mentioned being in a tree stand in the early morning hours and seeing a woman walking through the forest wearing a black cloak. She was just casually walking through the trees about 50 yards in front of me. He was saying, and at first I thought it was a tweaker who had wandered out in the woods and gotten lost or something, so I called out to her. And as soon as I did that, she stopped and turned to face me. I can't be sure of what I saw next because it still wasn't fully light outside, but I swear it looked like she had the legs of a goat or a horse or something. She stood facing me for a few minutes, then casually walked out of sight. It startled me pretty bad, and I haven't been out there since. Despite all the strange occurrences and stories, my childhood continued as normal. That is until my best friend Brandon disappeared. It was a warm, sunny day, and we were out in the woods playing hide and seek. It was Brandon's turn to hide when suddenly, as I was getting ready to go find him, I heard this singing. "Brandon," I called out, feeling a little uneasy now. "Brandon, I think we should go home now." But there was no answer. I decided that he must be ignoring me and would probably jump out from behind some tree at any moment. But he never did. At that moment, I heard his voice crying in the distance. It was very faint and muffled, but I clearly heard the words "help." "Brandon," I screamed. "Where are you?" I spent the next 2 hours searching for him in a dazed panic. This can't be real. This can't be real. I kept telling myself, like saying the words enough times would wake me up from some terrible nightmare. Finally, exhausted and crying, after finding nothing but one of his shoes, I gave up my search and returned home. It was dark when I reached my parents' doorstep, and they were furious, but also relieved when they saw me. "Where on earth have you been?" My mother shrieked. "How many times have we told you not to be out playing after dark? You could have been killed." Brandon's parents called and said he hasn't come home yet, said my father. "Where have you two been?" "I'm sorry," I cried. "I don't know what happened to him. We were playing hide and seek, and he disappeared. All I found was this." I sobbed and held up Brandon's shoe. My parents looked very alarmed by this and told me to remain in my room for the rest of the night. I lay down on my bed and passed out from sheer exhaustion, only to be awoken at about 11 p.m. to the sound of my parents talking. "This is just like the Burton's boy," said my mom. "I know," came the voice of my father. "Gone without a trace. The police are looking for Brandon as we speak. Maybe they'll have some luck with this case." Who was a Burton's boy? This had happened more than once. Was someone trying to get me too? It was all too much for my young mind to handle, and I once again fell into an uncomfortable sleep filled with nightmares and the screams of my friend. I woke up several times throughout the night in a cold sweat, and I swear I could hear the sound of a woman singing outside my window. Years have gone by now, and the case has since gone cold. Search and rescue teams searched for miles and miles after Brandon's initial disappearance, but in the end turned up with nothing. I am now fully grown with a family of my own, and about a month ago we decided to stay at my parents' house for a couple days so the kids could see Grandpa and Grandma. I was down in the basement going through some of my old childhood belongings when I noticed what looked like a trapdoor that had been hidden under some boxes. I was baffled. All those years I had lived here, but never knew about any secret doors in the basement. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go down and check it out. The trapdoor opened with a loud creak, and I climbed down an old rickety ladder that led down into its depths. I immediately found the light switch and flipped it on. I was standing in a small room with several workbenches covered with saws, knives, and power tools. But something else caught my eye. It was an old tape recorder. I picked it up and clicked the play button, but as soon as I did, I was gripped with absolute horror. It was the sound of the woman singing that beautiful music I had heard as a child. But only now did I realize that the woman I heard singing all those years ago was my mother. "It's not possible," I said aloud. I began going through drawers and cabinets, only to confirm my greatest fears. They were all filled with children's clothes. I began to retch at what I saw next. It was the pair of shoes Brandon had been wearing when he disappeared. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.